The moment my mother's eyes met Leo's across our dining room, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Her smile, that practiced predatory curve I'd watched her deploy against countless victims over the years, told me everything I needed to know. She was going to destroy him, piece by piece, the way she destroyed everyone who didn't meet her impossible standards. What I didn't know was that Leo had been waiting 15 years for this exact moment. What I couldn't have imagined was that the man I'd fallen in love with held the key to unraveling everything my family had built on lies. If you're enjoying this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything. The invitation had seemed so simple when I'd extended it 3 weeks earlier. "Would you like to meet my parents?" I'd asked Leo over coffee, watching the steam curl between us like the comfortable intimacy we'd built over 6 months of dating. He'd paused, a hesitation so brief I'd almost missed it, before nodding with that gentle smile that had first captured my heart. Now, standing in the marble foyer of my childhood home, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. "Ivy, darling," Mother's voice rang out like a bell, perfectly pitched to carry just the right amount of warmth for an audience while maintaining that underlying edge I knew so well. She descended the grand staircase in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and silk. Her silver hair swept into the kind of elegant chignon that took her stylist 2 hours to perfect. Dr. Margaret Whitmore, former university professor, current society maven, and my mother, had always been beautiful in the way that intimidated, rather than invited. At 62, she still commanded rooms with nothing more than her presence and that razor-sharp intellect she wielded like a scalpel. "Mother, I'd like you to meet Leo," I said, my voice steadier than my nerves. "Leo Martinez." Leo stepped forward, and I watched my mother's eyes catalog everything about him in the space of a heartbeat. His second-hand blazer, worn but clean. His shoes, polished but clearly not expensive. His dark hair, slightly too long for my mother's conservative tastes. His brown skin, which in my mother's world would immediately place him in a category she'd never openly acknowledge but would certainly judge. "A pleasure, Mrs. Whitmore," Leo said, extending his hand with a confidence that surprised me. His voice was warm, cultured, betraying none of the nervousness I'd expected. Mother took his hand with the barest touch of her fingertips, as if afraid of contamination. "How interesting," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "And what do you do, Mr. Martinez?" "I'm a social worker," Leo replied evenly. "I work with at-risk youth in the downtown district." The silence that followed felt like a blade hanging over all our heads. I watched my mother's expression shift through several micro-expressions: surprise, disdain, and something that looked almost like amusement. "How noble," she said finally, the word twisted into something sharp. "And where did you study? Community college?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "Mother, it's all right, Ivy," Leo said quietly, his hand finding mine with a squeeze that somehow managed to be both reassuring and warning. "I actually have a doctorate, Mrs. Whitmore, from Stanford." Mother's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "Really? How surprising. In what field?" "Educational psychology, with a focus on socioeconomic barriers to academic achievement." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I saw something flicker across my mother's face, a shadow of something I couldn't quite identify. "How academic," she said with that same tone she used when discussing things she found beneath her notice. "Your father is waiting in the study, Ivy. Perhaps Mr. Martinez would like to, freshen up before dinner?" It was a dismissal, polite, but unmistakable. Leo nodded graciously. "That would be lovely, thank you." As we climbed the stairs toward the guest bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something I'd missed entirely. Leo's hand in mine felt different, not nervous or uncertain, but purposeful, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. "I'm sorry," I whispered as we reached the landing. "She's always like this with people like me?" Leo's smile was gentle, but held an edge I'd never seen before. "Don't apologize for her, Ivy. You're not responsible for who she chooses to be." The way he said it, so specific, so loaded with meaning, made me study his face more carefully. There was something there, something I'd never noticed in all our months together. A hardness around his eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of old pain and older anger. "Leo," I started, but he was already moving toward the bathroom. "I'll just be a moment," he said, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as fine dining. Mother had outdone herself with the table setting. Crystal that caught the light like diamonds, silverware that cost more than most people's rent, flowers arranged with the precision of a military operation. Everything designed to intimidate, to remind our guest of exactly where he stood in the social hierarchy. Father, bless him, tried his best to be welcoming. Thomas Whitmore had always been the gentler of my parents, content to let Mother lead while he focused on his legal practice and his beloved books. But even his attempts at conversation felt strained under Mother's withering presence. "So, Leo," Father said as we settled into our seats, "Ivy tells us you work downtown. That must be challenging work." "It is," Leo agreed, accepting the wine Mother poured with the barest civility. "But rewarding. These kids face obstacles most people can't imagine. When you can help even one of them see a path forward, it makes everything worthwhile." "How admirable," Mother said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Though I imagine the pay is quite modest. Surely someone with your education could find more lucrative opportunities." I wanted to disappear under the table. "Mother, that's inappropriate. It's a fair question," Leo said calmly, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than his weekly salary. "You're right, Mrs. Whitmore. The pay is modest, but I've learned that there are more important things than money, such as—" Mother's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Integrity, for one. The ability to sleep at night, knowing you haven't built your success on other people's suffering." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. I saw Father's hand pause halfway to his glass, saw Mother's smile freeze in place. "How philosophical," Mother said carefully. "Though I suppose those of us who have worked hard to achieve success might have a different perspective on the value of ambition." "Oh, I believe in hard work," Leo said, cutting into his salmon with precise movements. "I just think it's important to be honest about what kind of work we're really doing. Don't you agree, Professor?" The word hit the table like a bomb. "Professor. Not Mrs. Whitmore, not ma'am, but Professor," said with a familiarity that made no sense, delivered with a weight that suggested history. Mother's fork clattered against her plate. For the first time in my life, I saw her composure crack. "I beg your pardon," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo looked up from his plate, his dark eyes meeting hers across the candle-lit table. When he smiled, it was nothing like the gentle expressions I'd grown to love. This smile was sharp, knowing, and absolutely merciless. I said, "Don't you agree, Professor Whitmore, about the importance of honesty in our work?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, vibrating with tension I didn't understand. Father looked confused, glancing between them as if watching a tennis match played in a language he didn't speak. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," Mother said, but her voice shook almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I think you do." Leo set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, completely at ease in a way that somehow made him more terrifying than any show of anger could have. "After all, we've met before. Though I suppose I looked quite different 15 years ago. Younger, poorer, more vulnerable." The word vulnerable seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the dining room. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. Mother had gone completely still, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I think there's been some mistake," she said, but the words came out strangled. "No mistake." Leo's voice was gentle now, almost kind, which somehow made it infinitely more dangerous. "Room 247, University Hall, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Social stratification in American education. A fall semester, 2010. Father set down his wine glass with a sharp click. "Margaret? What is he talking about?" But Mother wasn't looking at Father. She was staring at Leo as if he were a ghost risen from her past, her carefully maintained composure crumbling like old parchment. "You were quite memorable, Professor," Leo continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Though I don't suppose you'd remember me specifically. I was just another scholarship kid to you. Another statistical anomaly cluttering up your pristine classroom." "Leo," I whispered, confusion and growing horror warring in my chest. "What are you talking about?" He turned to me then, and for a moment his expression softened. "I'm sorry, Ivy. I know this isn't what you expected tonight, but some conversations are 15 years overdue." "You're Martinez," Mother said suddenly, the name falling from her lips like a curse. "Leonardo Martinez. The one who what, Professor?" Leo's voice cut across hers like a blade. "The one who asked too many questions? The one who challenged your theories about natural academic hierarchy? The one who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, Socioeconomic background had more to do with educational outcomes than innate intelligence. I felt like I was drowning. The man I'd been dating for 6 months, the man I'd been falling in love with, was suddenly a stranger. And my mother, my brilliant, accomplished mother, looked like she wanted to disappear. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "Your mother and I have a history," Leo said, his eyes never leaving Mother's face. "She was my professor during my undergraduate years. I was 22, working 3 jobs to pay for school, living on ramen and determination. I thought education was the great equalizer. I thought professors were supposed to lift students up, not tear them down." "That's enough," Mother said sharply, finding her voice again. "Whatever grievances you think I have," Leo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Professor, you spent an entire semester systematically destroying my confidence, my grades, and my faith in the academic system. You questioned my intelligence in front of the entire class. You suggested I was only there because of diversity requirements. You made me feel like an imposter, who had no right to dream of anything better than the circumstances I was born into." The words hit me like physical blows. This couldn't be true. My mother, whatever her faults, was an educator. She believed in learning, in lifting people up through knowledge, and "You're lying," I said weakly. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see the truth written in Mother's stricken face. "I wish I were," Leo said gently. "I really do, because it would make loving you so much simpler." The admission hung in the air between us. Despite everything, the revelations, the confrontation, the shattering of everything I thought I knew, he still loved me. It should have been a comfort. Instead, it felt like another weight pressing down on my chest. "Margaret," Father said quietly, his voice heavy with dawning understanding. "Please tell me this isn't true." But Mother couldn't seem to speak. She sat frozen in her chair, her perfect composure finally, completely shattered. "She gave me a D in the class," Leo continued, his voice steady, but his hands clenched on the table. "Not because my work wasn't good enough. I had all A's in my other classes, but because I dared to argue with her pet theories about social hierarchy and academic natural selection, because I had the audacity to suggest that maybe poverty wasn't a character flaw." "Stop," I whispered. "Please, just stop." "I almost dropped out," Leo said, and now I could hear the old pain beneath his controlled exterior. 22 years old, working myself to exhaustion, and my professor, someone I was supposed to respect and learn from, was telling me I didn't belong, that I was taking up space meant for more deserving students. "You have to understand," Mother said suddenly, her voice cracking like ice over deep water. "The standards, the academic integrity. Don't." Leo's voice cut through her excuse with surgical precision. "Don't you dare try to frame this as academic standards. This was cruelty, plain and simple, and we both know it." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw a stranger, the woman who had raised me, who had taught me about literature and art and the importance of education, suddenly seemed like a cardboard cutout of herself. How had I never seen this side of her? "Tell her about the paper," Leo said quietly. "What paper?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Mother's hands were trembling now. "Leo, please. The paper on educational equity that I spent 3 months researching and writing. 40 pages of carefully documented analysis about how systemic poverty creates barriers to academic achievement. I was so proud of it. I thought it might even be good enough to submit to an academic journal." Father was staring at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. "Margaret, what did you do?" "She gave it a failing grade," Leo said. "Not because the research was flawed. It wasn't. Not because the writing was poor. It was some of the best work I'd ever done. She failed it because it contradicted her belief that academic success was primarily about natural ability rather than opportunity. That's not," Mother started, then stopped, her words dying in her throat. "She wrote lacks intellectual rigor across the top of the first page," Leo continued relentlessly, "in red ink, like I was a child who had disappointed her. But that wasn't the worst part. I felt sick." "What was the worst part?" Leo was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if the words were physically difficult to speak. "She called me to her office hours, told me that people like me should be grateful for the opportunity to be educated at all, rather than challenging our betters. She said that scholarship students who got too big for their britches often found their financial aid reconsidered." The blood drained from my face. "She threatened your scholarship?" "Not in so many words. Never in so many words. Your mother is far too clever for that. But the message was clear. Fall in line, accept your place, or find yourself back where you came from. Father stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Margaret, tell me he's lying. Tell me you didn't threaten a student's financial aid over a difference of academic opinion. But Mother just sat there, her perfect mask finally, completely fallen away. Without it, she looked smaller somehow, older, almost fragile. I was protecting academic standards, she whispered. The integrity of the institution. You were protecting your ego, Leo said, but his voice was gentle now, almost pitying. You couldn't stand that a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town might understand something about education that you didn't. You couldn't bear the possibility that your theories about natural academic hierarchy might be wrong. How did you... I started, then stopped. How did you know who I was? When we met, did you know? Leo turned to me, and for the first time since this conversation began, he looked uncertain. Not at first. Your last name is common enough, and Ivy Whitmore didn't immediately connect to Professor Margaret Whitmore in my mind. But when you mentioned your mother was a former professor, when you told me about her work in educational theory, you knew, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. When you agreed to meet my parents, you knew exactly who she was. Yes, he said simply. I knew. The betrayal cut deeper than any of Mother's revelations. So what is this? Some elaborate revenge scheme? Get close to her daughter, make her fall in love with you, then humiliate her family? No. The word came out fierce, desperate. Ivy, no. What happened between us? What's happening between us? That's real. That was never part of any plan. But you planned this. I gestured at the wreckage of our dinner. This confrontation. You've been planning it for months. Leo was quiet for a long moment. I've been planning it for 15 years, he said finally. But not like this. Never like this. The admission hung in the air like smoke, choking and inescapable. I stared at the man I thought I knew, trying to reconcile the gentle, caring person who had held me through bad days and celebrated my small victories with this stranger who had orchestrated an elaborate confrontation with my family. 15 years, I repeated numbly. You've been planning this for 15 years. I need you to understand, Leo said, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes pleading. After what happened in her class, I almost gave up everything. I was so close to dropping out, to accepting that maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't belong in academia. Maybe people like me were meant to stay in their place. But you didn't, Father said quietly. He'd remained standing, his lawyer's mind clearly working through the implications of everything he was hearing. No, I didn't. But it took me 2 years of therapy and the support of 3 other professors to rebuild what she destroyed in 1 semester. 2 years to remember that my ideas had value, that my perspective mattered, that I belonged in those classrooms just as much as anyone else. Mother finally found her voice. You're being dramatic. One difficult class? Leo's control finally cracked, and I heard the years of buried pain and anger in his voice. Professor, you nearly destroyed my entire academic career. You made me question everything about myself, my intelligence, my worth. Do you have any idea what it's like to be 22 years old and have someone you're supposed to respect tell you that you're not good enough, that you never will be? I was maintaining standards, Mother said desperately. If you couldn't handle criticism... Criticism? Leo stood up now, his composure finally completely gone. You told me in front of the entire class that my research methodology was typical of someone from my background, and we all knew what that meant. You questioned whether I had actually written my own papers, suggested I might have had help from more qualified students. You made jokes about my financial aid, my secondhand clothes, my work-study job in the cafeteria. Each revelation hit me like a separate blow. I looked at my mother and saw a stranger, a cruel stranger who had systematically tortured a young man whose only crime was being poor and daring to have opinions. The worst part, Leo continued, his voice breaking slightly, was that I started to believe you. I started to think that maybe you were right. Maybe I was just fooling myself. Maybe I was taking up space that belonged to someone more deserving. Leo, I whispered, reaching for his hand, but he stepped back. I spent the next 5 years in graduate school working twice as hard as everyone else, not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I had to prove to myself that your mother was wrong. Every paper, every presentation, every interaction with a professor, I was hearing her voice in my head, waiting for someone else to tell me I didn't belong. The dining room felt like a tomb. Father had sunk back into his chair, his face gray with shock and what looked like shame. Mother sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks, her perfect makeup finally, utterly ruined. "So yes," Leo said, his voice steady again but hollow. "I've been planning this confrontation for 15 years. Not the details, not the specifics, but the moment when I could look her in the eye and tell her exactly what her academic standards cost, what her cruelty nearly stole from the world." "What do you mean?" I asked. Leo turned to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he smiled, really smiled, with warmth and genuine affection. "I mean that everything I've accomplished, every kid I've helped, every life I've been able to touch, none of it would have happened if I'd given up, if I'd let her win. You became a social worker because of what happened," I said, understanding dawning. "I became a social worker because I know what it feels like to be told you don't matter. Because I understand what it's like to have someone in power use that power to crush your spirit. Because I've seen firsthand how the system fails kids who don't fit the mold." He looked at Mother then, and his expression was complex. Anger and pain, yes, but also something that might have been pity. "I've helped over 300 kids get into college in the past 10 years, he said quietly. "Kids from broken homes, kids in foster care, kids whose parents never graduated high school. Kids just like I was, and every single one of them deserved better than what you gave me." The numbers hit the room like a physical force. 300 kids, 300 lives changed, dreams preserved, futures salvaged. I thought about Leo's modest apartment, his second-hand clothes, his careful budgeting, and suddenly understood the choice he'd made. He could have pursued a lucrative career, could have climbed the academic ladder, could have become wealthy and comfortable. Instead, he'd chosen to stand guard at the gate, making sure no other kid faced what he'd faced alone. "Margaret," Father said, his voice hollow, "how could you? How could you do that to a student?" Mother looked up at him, mascara streaking her cheeks like black tears. "You don't understand the pressures, Thomas. The expectations. The university was changing. They were pushing us to be more inclusive. The standards were being diluted." "Stop," I said sharply. "Just stop. Don't you dare try to frame this as some noble stand for academic excellence. You tormented a student because he was poor, and he dared to disagree with you. Ivy, no." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I've spent my entire life defending you, making excuses for your comments, your attitudes, your casual cruelty to people you deemed beneath you. I told myself it was just intellectual snobbery, that you were demanding excellence from everyone around you." Mother flinched, as if I'd slapped her. "But this isn't about excellence, is it? This is about power. This is about making sure that people who challenge your worldview are punished for it. This is about keeping people in their place. That's not— I would never— You threatened his scholarship," I said, my voice rising. "You threatened to destroy his future because he wrote a paper that made you uncomfortable. Because he had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the system you benefited from wasn't fair." Leo touched my arm gently. "Ivy, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," I said fiercely. "Because this is who she is. This is who she's always been. And I've been too blind to see it." The memories came flooding back then. Things I'd forgotten or rationalized away. The cutting comments about my friends from less privileged families. The way she'd dismiss my students' struggles as excuses. The casual racism disguised as intellectual discourse. The classism wrapped in academic language. "Do you remember Sarah Chen?" I asked suddenly. Mother looked confused. "Who?" "Sarah Chen. My friend from high school. Her parents owned a restaurant downtown. You met her once, when she came to pick me up for a school dance." I saw recognition flicker in Mother's eyes, and with it, guilt. "You told me later that I should be careful about the company I kept. That some people might try to use our family's connections to advance themselves. You made me question a friendship with one of the kindest, smartest people I knew, because her parents worked with their hands instead of their minds. Ivy, I was just looking out for you. You were poisoning me," I said quietly, "just like you tried to poison Leo. You were teaching me to see people as categories instead of individuals, to value credentials over character, to confuse privilege with worth." Father was staring at his hands, his shoulders slumped with what looked like defeat. "How many others were there, Margaret? How many students did you treat this way?" "I was protecting academic standards," Mother repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to her. You were protecting your own sense of superiority, Leo said, and the tragedy is that you probably destroyed potential that could have changed the world. How many kids gave up because of professors like you? How many brilliant minds were lost because they were told they didn't belong? The question hung in the air like an indictment. I thought about all the stories Leo had told me about his work, about kids who'd aged out of the foster system, kids whose parents were in prison, kids who'd been written off by everyone except him. How many of them might have become doctors, teachers, engineers, artists if they'd had someone believing in them instead of tearing them down. I need to go, I said suddenly, the weight of everything crushing down on me. I can't. I need air. I headed for the door, but Leo's voice stopped me. Ivy, wait. I turned back, and the expression on his face nearly broke my heart. Love and fear and desperate hope all mixed together. I need you to know, he said carefully, that meeting you, falling in love with you, that was never part of any plan. That was the universe's idea of either perfect justice or cosmic irony. I'm not sure which. But you knew, I said. For months, you knew who my mother was, and you didn't tell me. Because I was terrified, he admitted. Terrified that you'd choose her over me. Terrified that you'd see this moment as proof that I'm not good enough for you. That I'm just the vindictive scholarship kid trying to destroy your family. His words stopped me cold, because underneath all my hurt and confusion, that fear was exactly what was running through my mind. The thought that maybe this whole relationship had been built on deception, that maybe I'd fallen in love with someone who was using me to settle an old score. Are you? I asked, the question barely audible. Using me? No, he said immediately, stepping closer. Ivy, everything between us is real. The way I feel about you, the way you make me laugh, the way you challenge me to be better. None of that has anything to do with your mother or what happened 15 years ago. But you planned this confrontation. You've been planning it for 15 years. I plan to find her someday and tell her what her cruelty cost. I plan to make sure she knew that I succeeded despite her best efforts to destroy me, but I never planned to fall in love with her daughter. I never planned for this to become about anything more than old wounds and older anger. Father cleared his throat softly. Perhaps we should all take a moment to— No, I said sharply. I'm done taking moments. I'm done making excuses and smoothing things over and pretending that uncomfortable truths will go away if we just don't talk about them. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw 15 years of carefully constructed lies crumbling. You've been lying to me my entire life about who you are, about what you believe, about the kind of person you taught me to be. Ivy, please. I teach high school English, I continued relentlessly. Do you know what that means? It means I work with kids from every background imaginable. Kids who are brilliant but poor, kids who struggle but try harder than anyone I've ever met, kids who face obstacles you can't even imagine. Mother was crying openly now, her perfect composure completely gone. And every day, I try to make sure they know that their voices matter, that their perspectives are valuable, that they belong in my classroom and in any classroom they choose to enter. I try to be the teacher that Leo needed, and you refuse to be. You don't understand the pressures. I understand perfectly. I cut her off. I understand that you were threatened by a young man who dared to suggest that your comfortable theories about academic hierarchy might be wrong. I understand that you used your power to punish him for having the audacity to challenge your worldview. I understand that you're exactly the kind of professor that makes education a privilege instead of a right. Leo was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or relief. Or possibly just surprise that I was finally seeing clearly. The man I fell in love with, I said, turning to face him fully, dedicated his life to making sure no other kid goes through what you put him through. He makes less money than he could, works longer hours than he should, and spends his own time and energy lifting up kids that the system would rather ignore. That's who he is. That's who he chose to become after you tried to break him. Ivy, Mother started. And you, I said, rounding on her again. You became someone who hosts charity galas and talks about the importance of education while systematically destroying the confidence of students who don't fit your narrow definition of worthy. You became someone who confuses privilege with merit and uses academic language to dress up old prejudices. The words were harsh, but they felt like truth finally being spoken after years of careful politeness and willful blindness. I've spent my entire adult life trying to live up to your standards, I continued, my voice breaking slightly, trying to be the kind of intellectual, sophisticated person you taught me to value. But your standards are poison. They're designed to exclude rather than include, to maintain hierarchies rather than challenge them. Father stood up slowly, his face aged by the revelations of the evening. Margaret, I think you need to apologize. To both of them. An apology won't fix this, Leo said quietly. The damage is done. Has been done for 15 years. Then what do you want? Mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? Leo was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and calm. I want you to understand what you did, not just to me, but to every student who ever sat in your classroom and was made to feel less than. I want you to acknowledge that your academic standards were really just a way to punish people for not fitting your mold. He paused, looking directly at her. And I want you to know that despite your best efforts, I won. Not because I destroyed you or got my revenge, but because I became someone who builds up instead of tears down. Because I chose to be everything you refused to be. The final word settled over the dining room like a benediction, marking the end of something that had been 15 years in the making. I looked around at the wreckage of our family dinner, the cold food, the spilled wine, the shattered illusions, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. I need to go, I said again. But this time I walked to Leo's side instead of toward the door. We need to go. He looked at me with surprise, and something that might have been hope. Ivy, you don't have to. Yes, I do, I said firmly. Because staying here, pretending this didn't happen, making polite conversation while we all ignore the truth, that's not who I want to be anymore. I turned to face my parents one last time. Father looked broken, like a man discovering that the foundation of his house had been rotting for decades. Mother looked small and defeated, her tears carving channels through her perfect makeup. I love you, I said to them both, and meant it. But I can't pretend anymore that love means accepting cruelty. I can't keep making excuses for behavior that I would never accept from anyone else. Where will you go? Father asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted, but I know I can't stay here and act like this is normal, like this is okay. Leo touched my hand gently. Are you sure? This is your family, Ivy. Whatever happened between your mother and me, what happened between you and my mother is that she tried to destroy a brilliant, compassionate young man because he threatened her worldview. What happened is that she used her power to crush someone who deserved better. What happened is that she revealed exactly who she is, and I've been ignoring it my entire life. I took his hand in mine, feeling the calluses from his work, the strength in his fingers. And what happened is that somehow, despite everything she did to you, you became someone worth loving. Someone who chose to heal instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy, someone who makes the world better by existing in it. Leo's eyes filled with tears. Ivy, I'm not choosing you over my family, I said clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. I'm choosing integrity over comfort. I'm choosing truth over politeness. I'm choosing the kind of person I want to be over the kind of person I was raised to be. We left them there in the dining room, surrounded by the detritus of old lies and older pain. As we walked to the door, I could hear Mother crying, and Father's quiet voice trying to comfort her. Part of me wanted to turn back, to fall into old patterns of smoothing things over and pretending everything was fine. But Leo's hand in mine anchored me to my decision. This man who had every right to be bitter and vengeful had instead chosen compassion. He had turned his pain into purpose, his wounds into wisdom. Outside, the night air felt clean and cool against my flushed cheeks. We walked to his car in silence, both of us processing the earthquake that had just reshaped our relationship and my understanding of my own family. I'm sorry, Leo said, as we reached his modest Honda. I know this wasn't how you wanted tonight to go. Don't apologize, I said firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. He looked at me across the roof of the car, his expression vulnerable in the streetlight. I should have told you who your mother was when I realized. I should have been honest from the beginning. Maybe, I agreed, but I understand why you weren't. And honestly, I'm not sure I would have believed you if you'd told me months ago. I might have thought you were lying, or exaggerating, or trying to manipulate me. And now, I thought about the woman I'd seen tonight. Not the polished professor or society matron, but the cruel person underneath who had systematically tried to destroy a young man's dreams. I thought about all the signs I'd ignored over the years, all the casual cruelties I'd rationalized away. Now I know you were telling the truth, and I know that I've been blind to who my mother really is for most of my life. We drove through the quiet streets in contemplative silence. Leo's apartment was in a part of town my mother would have described as transitional, a euphemism for poor but improving. The building was old but well-maintained, the kind of place where working people lived modest, honest lives. "Do you want to come up?" he asked as we parked. "We could talk, or just sit, process what happened." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The evening had left me emotionally raw, like I'd been turned inside out and then put back together wrong. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Small but clean, furnished with second-hand pieces that had been chosen for comfort rather than style. Books everywhere, of course. Academic texts mixed with novels, poetry collections, and what looked like several dissertations by his former students. "Coffee?" he offered. "Something stronger?" "Wine, if you have it," I said, sinking onto his worn but comfortable couch. He disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard the soft sounds of glasses clinking, a cork being pulled. When he returned, he handed me a glass of red wine. Nothing fancy, but good enough. "So," he said, settling beside me with careful distance between us, "where do we go from here?" It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Where did we go from here? How did we move forward when our relationship had been built on a foundation of secrets and old wounds? "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I don't know you at all, like the man I fell in love with was hiding this huge part of himself from me." Leo nodded slowly. "I can understand that, and you'd be right in a way. I was hiding it. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because it's the ugliest part of my story. The part where I was weak and broken and almost gave up on everything I believed in. But you didn't give up," I pointed out. "You fought back. You proved her wrong. Eventually. But for a long time, I believed her. For months after that class ended, I walked around thinking maybe she was right. Maybe I was just fooling myself. Maybe I didn't belong in academic spaces. Maybe I should be grateful for whatever scraps I was thrown instead of demanding better." He took a sip of wine, his eyes distant with old pain. "The worst part wasn't even the failing grade or the threats to my scholarship. The worst part was how she made me doubt myself, how she planted this voice in my head that questioned every accomplishment, every success, every moment of confidence I tried to build. But you overcame it," I said softly. "With help. Lots of help. Therapy, supportive professors, friends who reminded me who I was when I forgot. It took years to silence that voice, and even now, sometimes I hear echoes of it." I set down my wine glass and turned to face him fully. "Leo, I need you to understand something. What my mother did to you was unforgivable. It was cruel and wrong and everything I hate about academic elitism. But what you did with that pain, how you turned it into something that helps other people, that's extraordinary. I just did what I had to do to survive," he said quietly. "No, you did more than that. You could have become bitter. You could have decided that if the system was cruel to you, you'd be cruel right back. Instead, you became someone who stands guard, making sure no other kid faces what you faced alone." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Do you know what I thought when I first met you?" he asked. "That I was probably just another privileged academic brat." He laughed softly. "Actually, no. I thought you were the most genuinely passionate teacher I'd ever met. The way you talked about your students, the way you lit up when you described helping a struggling kid finally understand a concept. It reminded me of why I wanted to become an educator in the first place." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. In all the chaos of the evening, I'd almost forgotten that this was how we'd started. Two people who cared deeply about education, about helping young people find their voices and their paths. "I fell in love with your dedication before I fell in love with you," he continued. "The way you saw potential in every student, the way you refused to write anyone off. It was everything your mother wasn't. But you knew who she was," I said. "You knew I was her daughter." I knew, and it terrified me. Because I was afraid that maybe the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Maybe underneath all that passion and kindness, you'd turn out to be just like her. The admission stung, but I couldn't blame him for it. If our positions had been reversed, I probably would have wondered the same thing. "What changed your mind?" "You did. Every day, in 100 small ways. The way you talked about your students from difficult backgrounds, with respect, not pity. The way you adapted your teaching style for kids with learning differences instead of just writing them off as lazy. The way you spent your own money on supplies for students who couldn't afford them." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. "You became a teacher for all the right reasons, Ivy. Not to maintain some academic hierarchy or protect institutional standards, but to genuinely help kids learn and grow. You became everything she could have been but chose not to be." His words settled something inside me that I hadn't even realized was unsettled. For years, I'd been trying to live up to my mother's example, to be the kind of intellectual and educator she'd taught me to value. But I'd been measuring myself against a corrupted standard, trying to emulate someone whose motivations were fundamentally selfish. I have something to confess too, I said quietly. Leo raised an eyebrow, waiting. Remember when you told me about your work with foster kids? About the teenager who aged out of the system but still came to you for advice about college applications? He nodded. I wanted to tell my mother about it. I thought she'd be impressed by your dedication, maybe even proud that I was dating someone who cared so much about education. But when I brought it up, she just made this dismissive comment about how some people are drawn to lost causes. Leo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I should have called her out on it, I continued. I should have defended you, defended the kids you work with. Instead, I just changed the subject because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. Ivy, I've been complicit, I said, the words rushing out now. Maybe not actively cruel like she was to you, but complicit in maintaining a system that judges people's worth based on their circumstances. Every time I stayed silent when she made classist comments, every time I rationalized her behavior as high standards instead of recognizing it as prejudice, I was part of the problem. Leo was quiet for a long moment, turning my words over in his mind. You were her daughter, he said finally. It's hard to see clearly when you're inside the system. When challenging it means challenging everything you were taught to believe. That's not an excuse, I said firmly. I'm a teacher. I should know better. I do know better. But you're learning. You're growing. That's what matters. I looked around his small apartment, at the evidence of a life lived with purpose and integrity, and felt ashamed of my own comfortable existence. My spacious apartment in the good part of town, paid for with family money. My designer clothes and expensive car, symbols of a privilege I'd never questioned. I need to do better, I said. Not just in how I see you, or how I respond to my mother, but in how I live my life, in what I choose to do with the advantages I was born with. What do you mean? I thought about the teenagers Leo worked with, about the barriers they faced that I'd never had to consider, about the kids in my own classroom who went home to empty refrigerators and unstable housing while I went home to comfort and security. I mean, I need to figure out how to use my privilege for something more than just maintaining it. I have advantages, family connections, financial stability, social capital. I should be using those things to help level the playing field, not just to make my own life easier. Leo's expression softened. You already do help. You're teaching. Teaching is just the beginning. I interrupted. What you said tonight about 300 kids getting into college, that's the kind of impact I should be having. Not just teaching literature to whoever happens to end up in my classroom, but actively working to make sure more kids have access to those classrooms in the first place. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The wine had relaxed me, but more than that, the honesty had. For the first time in months, I felt like I was seeing clearly, seeing Leo, seeing myself, seeing the world I wanted to help create. Can I ask you something? I said eventually. Anything. Tonight, when you confronted my mother, was it everything you thought it would be? Leo considered the question carefully. Yes and no, he said finally. Yes, because I finally got to tell her exactly what her cruelty cost. I got to let her know that she didn't break me, that I survived and thrived despite her best efforts. And no? No, because seeing her reaction, seeing how small and frightened she looked when her mask came off, it didn't feel like victory. It just felt sad. I understood what he meant. The woman we'd left crying in that dining room wasn't the powerful, intimidating professor who had terrorized a young student 15 years ago. She was just a frightened person who had built her identity on maintaining superiority over others, and who had just watched that entire foundation crumble. Do you forgive her? I asked. Leo was quiet for so long, I wondered if he'd heard the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I don't excuse what she did, and I don't think she deserves absolution without acknowledging the harm she caused. But I also don't carry hatred for her anymore. That poison was eating me up from the inside for too many years. What changed? Therapy, mostly, and time. And the realization that the best revenge against someone who tried to convince you that you didn't matter was to build a life that proved them wrong. He turned to me then, his dark eyes serious. But there's something else I need you to know, Ivy. Something I should have told you months ago. My heart clenched. What? Meeting you, falling in love with you. It changed everything for me. All those years, I thought I was carrying this pain and anger for a purpose, that someday I'd get my moment of confrontation and justice, and it would somehow heal the wound she left. But it didn't? It did, but not in the way I expected. The healing didn't come from confronting her. It came from loving you, from seeing that not everyone from your world is like her, from discovering that privilege doesn't automatically corrupt, that education can be about lifting people up instead of putting them down. The words hit me like a physical force. Leo, you saved me, Ivy. Not from your mother. I'd already saved myself from her years ago, but from the cynicism that was slowly eating away at my faith in people. You reminded me that there are educators who genuinely care about their students, that there are people with advantages who want to use them responsibly. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I love you, I said simply, because it was the only response that mattered. I love you too, he replied, more than I ever thought possible, which is why I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Can you forgive me for not telling you the truth from the beginning? Can you understand why I was afraid to tell you who your mother really was? I thought about it, really thought about it. The deception hurt. Yes, the months of hidden knowledge felt like a betrayal of the trust we'd built. But underneath all of that was a deeper truth. He had been protecting not just himself, but me. He had been trying to give us a chance to fall in love without the weight of old wounds and family secrets crushing everything before it could bloom. I can forgive you, I said finally, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from difficult truths. If we're going to do this, if we're going to build a real relationship, it has to be based on complete honesty, even when the truth is ugly or complicated or painful. I promise, he said without hesitation. And I promise the same thing. No more making excuses for behavior I know is wrong. No more staying silent when I should speak up. No more complicity disguised as politeness. We shook hands solemnly, like negotiators sealing a treaty. Then Leo smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him all evening. So where does this leave us? He asked. It leaves us with a choice, I said. We can let tonight destroy us. Let the revelations and confrontations drive a wedge between us that we can't overcome. Or we can use this as a foundation to build something stronger. What kind of foundation? I thought about the evening, about everything that had been revealed and destroyed and rebuilt, about the man sitting beside me who had turned his worst experience into his greatest strength, about the woman I wanted to become, inspired by his example. A foundation of truth, I said, and shared purpose. And the understanding that love isn't just about feeling good together. It's about helping each other become the people we're meant to be. Leo reached for me then, pulling me close against his side. I breathed in his familiar scent, felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my cheek, and knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. 3 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in Leo's bathroom, adjusting the collar of my blouse and trying to calm my nerves. Today was the day I'd been planning for weeks. Ever since that terrible and wonderful night when everything changed. You don't have to do this, Leo said from the doorway, his reflection joining mine in the mirror. Yes, I do, I said firmly. I should have done it 15 years ago, but I was 12 and didn't understand what I was seeing. I should have done it last year when I started teaching and began to understand the system better. I should have done it 3 months ago when you told me the truth. But you're doing it now, he pointed out gently. That's what matters. I turned to face him. This man who had taught me that integrity wasn't just about avoiding wrong. It was about actively choosing right, even when it was difficult. Are you sure you don't want to come with me? I asked. This isn't about me anymore, he said. This is about you doing what you know is right, and you need to do it alone, for your own peace of mind. He was right, of course. This conversation had to happen without him there, without the specter of old wounds and older grievances complicating things. This was about my relationship with my mother, about the woman I was choosing to become. The drive to my parents' house felt both eternal and instantaneous. Part of me hoped no one would be home, that I could postpone this confrontation indefinitely. But Mother's car was in the driveway, and when I rang the doorbell, she answered almost immediately. Ivy, she said, surprise and hope warring in her voice. I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk, I said simply. She stepped aside to let me in, and I noticed how much she seemed to have aged in just 3 months. Her hair was less perfectly styled, her makeup more subtle, her clothes more casual than I'd ever seen them. She looked for the first time in my memory like an ordinary woman rather than an intimidating academic. Your father is at the office, she said as we settled in the living room. He's been working late a lot lately. I nodded, not surprised. The revelations of that dinner had shaken Father's faith in everything he thought he knew about his wife. They were in counseling, I'd heard through family friends, trying to rebuild trust that had been damaged by decades of willful blindness. "How are you?" Mother asked carefully, as if afraid of the answer. "I'm well," I said. "Leo and I are well." She flinched slightly at his name, but nodded. "I'm glad. Despite everything, I'm glad you're happy." "Are you?" I asked. "Glad I'm happy, or just saying what you think I want to hear?" Mother was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands. "Both, I think. I want you to be happy, Ivy. I've always wanted that. But I'm also afraid that my happiness comes at the cost of our relationship." "It doesn't have to," I said carefully. "But that depends on what you're willing to acknowledge, what you're willing to change." "I've been thinking about that night," she said quietly. "About what Leo said, about what you said, about the kind of teacher I was, the kind of person I became. And I think I lost sight of why I became a professor in the first place. Somewhere along the way, teaching stopped being about helping students learn and became about proving how smart I was, how important I was, how much better I was than the people around me. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected, and it gave me hope. "What changed?" I asked. "You did," she said simply. "Seeing you walk away that night, seeing the disappointment in your eyes, it forced me to look at myself honestly for the first time in years, and I didn't like what I saw." She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I've been volunteering," she said quietly. "Volunteering?" "At the community college downtown, tutoring students in basic composition and study skills. Many of them are the first in their families to attend college. They're working multiple jobs, supporting children, overcoming obstacles I never had to face." I stared at her in surprise. "You're tutoring at the community college?" 3 days a week. It was Leo's idea, actually. "Leo's idea?" My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. "He called me about a month after that dinner, said he'd been thinking about our conversation, and he had a suggestion for how I might begin to make amends." I felt a flash of irritation. Leo and I had agreed on complete honesty, but he hadn't mentioned reaching out to my mother. "What did he say?" "He said that the best way to atone for using education as a weapon was to use it as a tool for justice instead. He suggested I find ways to help students like he used to be, rather than continuing to tear them down." Mother's voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion underneath. "And he said something else. He said that forgiveness wasn't something he could give me, because I hadn't earned it yet. But he said that if I was serious about making amends, there were hundreds of students who needed someone to believe in them, the way I should have believed in him." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Leo had never mentioned contacting my mother, never said anything about encouraging her toward redemption. But it was exactly the kind of thing he would do. Offer a path forward instead of just leaving someone to drown in their mistakes. "How has it been?" I asked. "The tutoring?" "Humbling," Mother said immediately. "These students, they're so much braver than I ever was. They're pursuing education despite financial hardship, family obligations, societal barriers. They remind me of what education is supposed to be about. And they're teaching me things I never learned in graduate school. About resilience, about determination, about the difference between intelligence and opportunity." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "There's a young woman named Maria who reminds me of Leo at that age. Brilliant, passionate, full of ideas that challenge conventional thinking. The kind of student I would have, the kind of student I did try to crush back when I was teaching. But not now. Now I try to nurture that fire instead of extinguishing it. I try to be the professor I should have been all along." I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of anger I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it. Mother's eyes filled with tears again. "Really? Really. It takes courage to admit you were wrong, and even more courage to try to make it right." "I don't know if I can ever make it right," she said quietly. "The damage I did to Leo, to other students over the years, I can't undo that." "No," I agreed. "You can't. But you can make sure it doesn't happen again. You can use the rest of your life to build up instead of tear down." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the changes that had occurred over the past few months. "Ivy," Mother said eventually, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Do you think you can ever forgive me? Not just for what I did to Leo, but for all the ways I warped your understanding of the world? For teaching you to see people as categories instead of individuals?" It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Could I forgive her? Did I want to? I think forgiveness is a process, I said carefully, not a destination. I can see that you're genuinely trying to change, and that means something. But trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions over time. I understand, and I need you to understand something else. My relationship with Leo isn't going to change because you're making amends. I'm not going to love him less or distance myself from him to make you more comfortable. I wouldn't ask you to, Mother said quickly. He's a good man, Ivy. The kind of man I should have recognized and nurtured when he was my student instead of trying to destroy. Yes, he is, I said simply. And he loves you. Really loves you. That was obvious even in the middle of all that anger and pain. I smiled despite myself. How could you tell? The way he looked at you when you were defending him. The way he tried to protect you from the worst of the confrontation, even though he had every right to let you see me at my absolute worst. Mother paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. He could have used his relationship with you to hurt me more deeply. He could have turned you against me completely, poisoned our relationship as revenge for what I did to him. Instead, he's encouraging reconciliation. That tells me everything I need to know about his character. It was true, I realized. Leo could have used my love for him as a weapon against my mother, could have demanded that I choose sides and cut her out of my life entirely. Instead, he had quietly worked to create opportunities for healing, for growth, for the possibility of redemption. I'm going to marry him, I said suddenly, the words surprising me as much as they surprised my mother. He's proposed? Not yet. But he will, and when he does, I'm going to say yes. Mother nodded slowly. Good. You should marry him. You should build a life with someone who brings out the best in you, who challenges you to be better than you thought possible, even though it means your son-in-law will be someone you once tried to destroy, especially because of that, Mother said quietly. It means I'll have a daily reminder of the person I used to be, and the person I'm trying to become. It means I'll never be able to forget the cost of cruelty or the power of redemption.